Well, hello, and Simone here, Director of Program Growth, and I am with Laura Zambrana, our Director of Content. Welcome, Laura.
Hello, thank you.
So happy for this episode on this in honor of Labor Day weekend in the United States. I don't know what our global Endow women do over this weekend in September, but I don't know if there are Labor Days in other countries, but there certainly is in America. So in honor of Labor Day weekend, we are so excited to talk about leisure, labor, the vices attached to it, and all of that. But we're going to do one of those things similar to a few weeks ago when Annette Bergen, our executive director in Endow, interviewed me about the 4 cardinal virtues. Laura is going to lead this conversation that we're going to have on leisure. So Laura, take it away.
I'll leisurely lead us in this conversation. Simone, thank you so much for letting us chat about leisure, a topic that you and I both talk about all the time and are deeply concerned about. So I'm excited to talk about it with you today. To kind of contextualize our conversation, I peeked at Joseph Pieper's Leisure, Basis of Culture, which I've heard about for many, many years. So the pleasure to actually dive into it. One of the things that he mentions early on and several times that I want to hear your thoughts on immediately is, what does it mean to enjoy leisure, or to have the capacity to enjoy leisure? That's a thing I want to start off with, is what do you think that means?
Great. Yeah. Well, yeah, and as you mentioned, we talk about leisure all the time, and that book is so crucial. So if you haven't read it, yeah, she can hold that up for the YouTube watchers. I know people say all the time, like, you got to read this book, you got to read that book, but this one is actually one that ought to be read. So back to your question. Is your question, how do we enjoy leisure?
Yeah, the full phrase is like to have the capacity to enjoy leisure. So we can break apart that phrase. Like, what is this capacity? What is this enjoyment? What is leisure?
Oh gosh, it's a hard question. Well, Pieper, defines leisure as like a condition of the soul, an attentiveness, to be this inward calm. So I think people, in the culture, the way that leisure is thrown around is like, there's leisure world, and that means you're like doing fun, entertaining, amusing activities, and you're going to Disneyland, and so it's related to an activity, something that you're doing that's fun, that's not labor, that's not work. Whereas Joseph Pieper talks about leisure as a capacity in the soul, this inward calm, this state of calm, this attentiveness, to be kind of at peace and attentive to the reality in front of you. So to enjoy that. And where does he say that in the text, Laura?
The capacity part is page 43.
It's been a while since I picked up that book, so I'm curious how he uses that in context, because it's, if you have achieved a leisurely state, not just like, oh, now I'm leisuring, but
right,
I have the habit in my being of leisure, so that I maintain a leisurely posture toward life, even when I'm working, whether I'm working or I'm at Disneyland, I'm at leisure. And that is not just enjoyment for this or that activity, but it's enjoyment of life, period.
Right. The full phrase here is, leisure, it must be clearly understood, as a mental and spiritual attitude. Not simply the result of external factors.
Right.
Nor is it the inevitable result of spare time, a holiday, a weekend, or a vacation. It is an attitude of the mind, a condition of the soul. So what I love, again, thinking about Labor Day, our women getting off of Labor Day, is there's this sense of, oh, I just need a day off. If I could just have a day off, if I could just have a vacation, or if I could just have a massage, like everything will be great again in my life, Right. All I need is my latte in the corner, and like I'll be fine.
Yeah.
And there's a reality in which leisure does not, again, being an attitude, a spiritual and mental, which again, I think is helpful to use those two. I'm always annoyed at how in vernacular we use the word spiritual to mean like not real. Like,
Yeah,
oh,
that is one of your
spiritual
pet peeves that I enjoy a lot, because we get annoyed a lot about a lot of things.
A lot of things.
That's
but
one
like
of my favorite.
You have a spiritual motherhood, as if like that's not, the real thing, but we'll call it spiritual, or she's spiritual, kind of
meaning so the heart of your pet peeve is that it seems implied, or there's a certain connotation that what is spiritual isn't real.
Yes.
And actual. Yeah. That is a big pet peeve, because the spiritual is the most real.
And then this quote here on page 46, leisure is a mental and spiritual attitude. So it's not just like mental, like not just in your habits of the mind, but also your habits of the soul.
Right. So
real.
Yeah. So our culture is kind of like, our culture is certainly characterized by the contrary vice to this virtue, which is sloth or achadia. And the reaction against that, even though I don't know that our culture is aware of all this stuff, but, is that we need mindfulness, right? There's a mental attitude that has been realized is lost, that there's like this lack of attentiveness, this lack of mental attention or mindfulness. Mm-hmm. The spiritual part, I think what Pieper is implying, is that this mental attentiveness to reality then points you to the ultimate reality, which is God.
Right.
So it's like mental and spiritual attitude.
Exactly. The other, there's like so much here I want to dive into. A couple other thoughts that I had while reading it. So Simone knows this. I love all things productivity, like the life hacks, the quick 1, 2, 3 to change your life. But what I love about what he's bringing up in here is that all of this, the move towards the productive and towards this thirst for productivity, it's all a very modernist approach to the world. We weren't always supposed to be productive, and the highest end was not to be super amazing, crazy productive and having 600 different projects happening all at once. He goes in here and talks about the Middle Ages and how the highest, somewhere here he says the highest, I think it's towards the end.
The most productive time was also the most leisurely time.
Right, and
the truly creative, productive time, the conditions which allowed for European and Western civilization to flourish were focused on leisure and contemplation. Interesting paradox, but it's not a paradox.
Aquinas, here it is, page 41. In the Middle Ages, the same view prevailed. It is necessary for the perfection of human society, Aquinas writes, that there should be men who devote their lives to contemplation. Nota bene, necessarily not only for the good of the individual who so devotes himself, but for the good of human society. That's again so not how we me. It's about me and my good. Again, the individualism being a huge focus of our current culture, and then also the no sense of the common good. Whatever, people over there doing their thing, that's their thing, that's different than what I'm doing, in that big division. And then the idea that people should be devoting themselves to contemplation, that is like you said, the lifeblood of where culture comes from.
You're taking this in a direction that I don't even know if you realize you're taking it in, or that I certainly didn't expect, but not surprised by the brilliance, which is you, is that the individualism, at least we'll speak in an American context, although of course America has influenced a lot of the world, the individualism, the autonomy that we value so much, is certainly contrary to leisure. Certainly contrary to leisure. Yes.
And where I wanted to go with that next is towards the end, the last section, where he talks about that all holidays were supposed to be religious experiences.
Holy days, holidays.
So I think it's so ironic that we're celebrating, that we're having this go out on Labor Day, because basically people's it's a made up thing. Like, it's not like you're not celebrating anything like actually real, and that leisure is a gift like from the gods. The first quote in the text is from Plato, which says that holidays are gifts from the gods to not just give us a break from work, but actually to replenish us as humans. Like,
and we work so that we may be at leisure, Aristotle says.
right.
Yes. And that the height of leisure is festivity, which in a Catholic context is the festival, the celebration of the Mass, is worship. So
Right.
we go, if we're just going to kind of take it from our like cultural milieu, like we go from like mindfulness, like a mental attitude and openness, to like an openness to what ultimate reality, the other person, from the other person to then God, to affirmation of God and affirmation of self in God, from that to then worship, festival, and then joy. And so it's
Actual, like, going back to that first thing, like enjoying leisure.
Yes.
Like, so leisure's a gift, like having the ability to like experience, again, leisure is not something earned.
And think about how think about our own, if we can point to moments in our life that are most joyful. I guarantee that everyone would not say, I mean, maybe some people would say, oh yeah, I was alone, but that's only because they didn't have enough solitude, prayer, and contemplation as a habit in their own life. But most of the time, when we think about joy and enjoyment, we're thinking about cherished, attentive times with our families, with our friends, with other people, right? And to enjoy leisure is ultimately to enjoy each other and to enjoy communion with God and the creativity that is born of that communion and contemplation, right? It was the contemplation of the monastics, that allowed for all the inventiveness, right? And I love reading medieval history and just clocks and aircraft and beer and champagne and like all this stuff that arose because people put prayer and leisure first, right?
And I argue as well as they know what it's all for. I think that's for me the big like gift of this book, and even thinking about leisure and why we rest and why we work, is we have to think about what's everything for. So if you are in a small middle ages, small town in Middle Ages, like it's very clear what the biggest building is. It's very clear, like what
is the cathedral's in the center of the town, and it's the most beautiful building. But when you say what it's all for, what do you mean by it?
Like, what I mean by it is like life. I probably like life, period.
Life.
Like what
Yeah,
life, like the whole thing.
Yeah.
Why I think it's so funny. I'm like, oh sure, Simone, I'm talking about leisure, how to rest, self-care, sure. But the reality that leisure is it's not an optional thing. It's not like, oh, leisure, that's for like people that's when you're older, that's when you don't have small kids, you're not working, like that.
You see what happens to a culture. I mean, you can look at ours. Sorry to be so gloomy and doomy, but it's not the greatest culture, right? Is it when leisure has become quote optional? We have a very lonely, despairing, confused, don't know what life is for culture.
I think we see that and we all fall into this, where we have a good day off or we do have a moment of leisure and you're not enjoying it because you haven't
built it into your life.
Right. It's not like all of a sudden it's not like, oh cool, now I'm gonna just like magically leisure.
Well,
often
with all virtue, it's not like you do one virtuous act. You do one act of justice and you go, oh, I'm a just person. No, you have to do a number of virtuous acts to then have it become a virtue in you.
Right.
And so same with leisure. You can't just take one day off, or I kind of joke around like being a spiritual bulimic, like I have one day of really lots of really great prayer, and then the rest of the month is kind of whatever, and then you can't say you have a spirituality or a relationship, a consistent relationship, if it's like that. So too with leisure, and to really enjoy leisure, just to go back to that phrase, I mean, like to enjoy a person, because ultimately God is three persons, right? You have to there has to be cultivation of that. You have to get comfortable with God. How do you get, and you have to get comfortable with yourself to get comfortable with people. How do you do that if you don't spend the time doing that. So,
and it's also, I love the phrasing here too, that leisure is actually about celebration. Because I think like sometimes for the more active among us, the idea of leisure is kind of like, ugh, what are you talking about? Like leisure.
yeah,
And like when you use the word like celebration, and Hebrew uses this word, there's something about celebrating again that like, yeah, you make the cake, you like put up the balloons, like there is like some kind of work involved in celebration.
well, leisure is not contrary to work, it's how you're working, right?
Yeah.
Is it you're slapping the birthday cake on the, like, am I just rushing myself off to mass, check it off, Sunday, got to stay out of mortal sin? Or am I truly, slowly, with attention, with enjoyment, with anticipation, going to worship God? And I can't.
Right. And that's where like,
that's always the
that,
right?
well, and that's where like the human virtues of like what it means to slow down, what it means to rest, what it means to make a cup of tea, what it means to read the paper, like these very basic cultural things that used to be very normal on our Sundays. Like, no, I mean, who does that anymore? Like really slows down on Sunday. Like it's you don't see it. I know people do, but you don't see it as much in our cult. Like you to actively, you have to actively.
Yeah. There's the one element of the slowing down on a Sunday, right? Like where you just like, I'm like, oh my gosh, like the truth is God owns time and space. So everything's his, and Sundays are like especially his. And
Right.
so I don't have to like squeeze mass into my schedule or catch up. I can be leisure, like it's slow. I don't have to be looking at my watch during mass and the homily's too long. So what? Because it's like all his time anyway. And I don't have anywhere better to be because this is God's time. But it's not even about the slowing down and the not doing so much, but about the fact that how you're doing it. Because you can have very, quote, full of activities Sunday or any day. But the way that it is approached is with that mental and spiritual attitude that we call leisure. So
I think like that, yeah, and that has to do too with like how we are called to be human and like what it means to be free, and that God created Sundays. So I'm sure I'm sure I'll get this wrong, but that like the Sunday is not like we don't exist. Like the Sunday rests not just it's God's time and it's for God, but ultimately God is for us. You know, like He actually wants, like He wants us to be more. It's not like you must slow down, not look at your watch. But it's like,
this is what I love. That's what I love about like Orthodox Jews, right? Who like don't even use electricity. Is that talk about Sundays being humanity's or the Sabbath, for the protection of our dignity.
Exactly. That's where I think that's what I think. Leisure is not an optional topic. Like leisure is like, are you living a human life or aren't you?
Well, this is why it's one of my favorite topics, because when I read Pieper's book for the first time, first of all, as a little immigrant child of Middle Eastern parents, I was like, oh, this is why I feel really weird and with American of like utilitarian productivity, right?
Yeah.
Explain that, but just on a Christian and a human level, like if Christians, and this is why it's such a scandal that churches and parishes are too busy, or that they're just
right.
Christians themselves don't live leisure well. Like of all people, we claim this, we should witness to it in a radical way. But if we're doing the whole like, oh, I'm just so busy, if that's the way that we talk as Christians, it's definitely a scandal. And how does the Sabbath protect our dignity? Because if I really say as a Christian that my dignity doesn't come from wealth, pleasure, power, honor, my youth, my money, my work, my prestige, if I really believe, that my dignity comes from the fact that I belong to God and I am his child and made in his image and likeness, if I really believe
in a community, I'm part of God's family.
I'm part, and if I really believe that I'm loved into being, and I don't have to prove anything because God's like, I already got you. Sunday is the manifestation of that dignity. The day where I say, this is where I prove to myself, because idolatry, oh, how easily it creeps up in us. Yeah. And to the world that my dignity comes from my relationship with God, that my happiness comes from my relationship with God. That has to be a priority. Parishes need to become schools of prayer. as John Paul II called for, and the only way they can become schools of prayer is if they firstly take leisure very seriously. Very, very seriously.
And again, like the balance of, again, wanting to be very precise philosophically, but also very practical, is a very practical thing can be talking with your family and friends, like, what could we do this fall to make Sundays more leisurely? And just like thinking through, like, not, I'm always like, let's.
Well, I pretend I'm Jewish. So I grew up in Los Angeles where I'd see Orthodox Jews, just like walking to synagogue, and I just loved it because it was so countercultural, and I just like, wow, I literally, it's like a work deadline. I have to get the project of my life done by Sunday night. By Sunday night, it has to be done.
Yeah.
I cannot do it. Now I can use my toaster on Sundays. I'm not going to go that far, but like literally I have to shape my life and live my life Monday through Saturday in such a way that Sunday, I don't just like in a moralistic way give it to God, but in a truly, like Hugo said, joy.
But then going back to, because I really want to talk about Kant, like my favorite philosopher. Not literally my favorite philosopher, but somebody who I think like has shaped our modern consciousness so deeply. Okay, so it's not so much, so what I wanted to bring up, what you just said, like preparing your whole week such that Sunday you can rest. I think that's right. But I do think that there's a way in which like we can try to like earn leisure, like we can try to like
what?
Earn leisure, like I'm gonna work really hard, and then Sunday I'm gonna like do,
the work hard, play hard. You want to make sure you get that out of the way. Oh, that's good. Yeah.
And I think that somewhere, in the when God's talking about the Sabbath, he like leaves a double portion for the Jews when they're wandering in the desert on Saturday. So there's a way in which like we don't even have to like work extra hard during the week for Sunday. Like God's like, I got you. I'll give you extra portion so you don't have to like overdo it the day before.
Well, yeah, and the only way that if you're gonna live really well, to really like be able to interiorly enjoy Sundays, to enjoy your Sabbath, that means every day you have to be cultivating leisure, not in the way you're saying, but like, work hard, play hard, but like I actually have to slow down to cultivate this mental attitude throughout the week. Great point.
And I just love what a tender like image, I guess, with like, again, the Israelites wandering in the desert, and he leaves them a double portion. So like how many times are we missing God's giving us like a double portion, like extra grace, and being like, oh, I need to like work really hard so we can have this incredible liturgical celebration on Sunday.
Exactly. Like, we've had insecurity issues since the fall, right? Like,
and like God keeps being like, my grace is ever new every morning. Like I will fill you. So again, what I got from this book, like the big picture is like, either you believe and you live as if everything is gift, or you don't. So either you believe that like the ability to work is a gift, the ability to rest is a gift, the ability to like everything, to enjoy leisure.
Yeah, but it's so uncomfortable because it's so humble.
And you're not in control.
It's very humbling.
Yeah. So then I wanted to chat about Kant.
So how do we relate this all
from gift to Kant. Kant is a gift. So Kant is a 19th century philosopher who thinks a lot about epistemology, which means like how we come to know something. And in philosophy and theology and in life, the way that a philosopher or theologian explains to you how humans come to know things basically determines their whole view. So you don't always want to start with like, well, Hegel thought XYZ about the city. It's like you want to actually go back to like, how did he think about human nature? Like, what is human nature? How do humans get to know things? And then you can build from there. So that's just like a word of caution to people that are like, oh, well, this conclusion looks fine. Like Marx is all about the poor. That's awesome. The poor. Hooray, Marx.
Are you just saying that when you look at modern philosophers, you have to like look at their understanding of the human person before
I am. And then exactly. And then what's really cool and fascinating about how Kant sees how we think and how we contemplate is this is on like page 30-ish.
Are you referring to his notion of work? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So this is around like page 26. I thought this was so interesting. So he says in here, is there a good like summary quote? I mean, basically Kant understands philosophy as work, not as leisure. Like fundamental shift that we have to, it's not that we earn, almost like we have to earn the ability to philosophize, we have to earn, it's all work. And people are saying like, slow down, think about how we actually come to know reality. Like, I'm not working to be like, look, the sun. Like, I'm not like working hard. Like, what is that round thing? I don't know. Like, there's no.
So just so to backtrack a little bit, what you're saying is that Kant has a notion. I think what people are saying is that leisure isn't contrary to work. That there is a way to work. There is a way to know and to work. And you're talking about in terms of like philosophizing, that is leisurely, that includes that there's a leisurely way to work. And Kant is saying, no, the only way to work is not leisurely. So that I think you're talking about like discursive learning versus intuitive learning, right? Yeah.
And that, again, Kant is, in my opinion, rejecting the idea of all is gift. So either you think that you're earning everything, I'm earning this hard, I've worked so hard, we're going to go on vacation, it's going to be a great week. Like, either you have the mentality of like hard work and like me-centric, or you have the mentality of like, my life is a gift and I'm responding to a gift.
Yeah.
So I see that as like,
so even if I'm doing discursive work, which means I'm like philosophizing, taking things apart, thinking really deeply, all those things that people unpacks in Leisure, the Basis of Culture. There's also a way of knowledge, right, that is contemplative. I think that's what you're trying to say here.
And that's higher and more. I mean, this is from the Summa. Hard work is what is good. In the Summa Theologica, however you say that, we find St. Thomas proponing a contrary opinion. The essence of virtue consists in the good rather than in the difficult.
Yeah. So Aquinas is saying, actually, in fact, it's not just disagreeing with Kant that all work can't be leisurely, meaning that there can't be this like contemplative dimension to philosophizing, but Aquinas is also saying that the best knowledge comes when it comes to you as an illumination, as an inspiration, and you don't have to work for it at all, which is.
But there's kind of this like there's kind of this like this Protestant puritanical idea of like, if you work hard, if you work hard, you'll get good results. Like, I'm going to like will this and like work hard, which I feel like is very American. And
and again, just to go back to like the monastic movement and the building of Western civilization, it's not that the monks weren't, the Benedictine motto is ora et labora, pray and work. It's not that they didn't work hard. So we don't. For all the people who are like, wait a minute, it's not that the monks didn't work hard. It's just that they worked with a certain attention to reality, without discounting the gift, without discounting contemplation. And in fact, it was those illuminations and inspirations that led to very practical innovations, engineerings, metallurgy, agricultural,
well, they knew what the work was.
All that stuff. Yeah, exactly. And they knew it. Sorry. No. You hear this with like, Steve Jobs and like others who were like, I was just like taking a walk and I got the idea with the iPhone, right? It's received as like a gift. Because there's an attention, there's that leisurely state of contemplation that allows for kind of inspiration to come. So this is not saying like, oh, you're working too hard, but in a sense of understanding that the hard work can be a fruit and oriented out of a contemplative, leisurely, and prayerful attitude. So,
and that when you're working hard, you're thinking like you're oriented towards leisure. Like work is not the end.
Yeah.
Okay, sorry.
That's right. Do we want to talk at all about Achadia?
Oh, I mean, it's like I feel like, yes, we should definitely talk about it.
I mean, I don't want to like, because you're you're in charge of this conversation.
Let me summarize. We'll switch to a Chady a second. Let me summarize what
if you want. I just feel like it's gotta be mentioned a little bit, maybe. Take over here.
This is like a thing that I want people to think of. This is how Pieper interprets Thomas's last thing about hard work. He says, not everything that is more difficult is necessarily more meritorious. I think that's really important. I think
your guy Cal Newport says that. I mean, he's I mean, Laura's like a Cal Newport, fan, but he says that too. Just because you're working harder at work doesn't mean you're being smart and efficient. Not to reduce like this lofty theological talk on leisure to that, but I think he's onto something when he says that. You don't have to, it's not like if it doesn't hurt, it's not from God, right?
Right. So I just think that's really, again, worth like whenever we're like pushing really hard for something in the spiritual life, in our work life, our family life, it's worth thinking through like, what's the goal here? What am I actually working towards? So I love that phrase. And then, sorry, you mentioned Steve Jobs, and I have a note here about Steve Jobs on page 69.
No way. I didn't know that.
So in its extreme form, the passion for work, naturally blind to every form of divine worship and often inimical to it, turns abruptly to its contrary, and work becomes a cult.
Idolatry.
Becomes a religion. To work means to pray, Carlyle wrote, and he went on to say that fundamentally all genuine work is religion, and any religion that is not work ought to be left alone. But I wrote here on the side, like the tech world, like the cultish, like, oh my gosh, the latest Apple product, like that. There's like this, and again, that's consumerism too, but with the lack of celebration, like actual liturgical living, celebration, huge festivals, huge parties, even if people, don't always follow what Corpus Christi is, or they don't know all the meanings behind it, you can't miss the celebrations in Europe. You can't miss, like, there's a big deal here going on, like a big deal going on. I'm not into it. It's not my kind of thing. But like people can't help, even if you're atheist, they can't help to notice the celebrations. And without those celebrations, you create your own celebrations.
Yeah. Right.
Anyway, so I just thought it was so funny, like the work becomes a cult, and I was like Apple. Because I'm wearing my Apple Watch.
As you wear your Apple Watch. Well, I think again, I don't know the tech world, but I think is it Google, or am I even making this up? Is it Facebook? I don't know. But I heard one of those big important places where you can take as much vacation as you want. And I think again, the human nature, the human spirit, the heart is the truth detector. So it's not like they're reading, Joseph Pieper on their weekends, but there is something brilliant about the fact that somebody said, wow, if we kind of take the pressure off and let people's humanity dictate their work. In fact, what they realized is that their workers became more efficient when they had sufficient time for rest, for leisure, for play. So that's interesting. It's interesting.
But it's still outside of religion.
Oh yeah.
Like they're not saying take your Sundays or
they're not
days.
Right. But but back to the whole mindfulness cult. The people who are behind the mindful movement, I mean, they're not like, actually, we really need to cultivate this mental attitude because we need to get people leisurely, because we need to get people praying, because we need to get people in contemplation and happiness only comes with union with God. They're not thinking that through. But human nature is demanding that an attention to mental attitude, and it is hilarious to me. I'm not going to elevate it to a level of a personal pet peeve, but it is hilarious to me that so many Christians, and this is not judgmental, love the mindfulness movement, but the fact that they're finding it in secular outlets when our church has been teaching this since the beginning is a little bit, okay, like that's kind of, let's get on that new evangelization track.
Yeah, well, and like how God is in the detail, like God, like the rest throughout the day.
And that's, like you said, spirituality has to do with the real. So where do we go back? Where do we go wrong in certain church places where the spiritual, or so-called spiritual, has refused to answer the humane needs that humanity was stripped? And if humanity is taken out of the picture, it's not really spirituality, because before we can be priests, and I mean like Christians and disciples, we have to be human beings. And
right.
so you can't strip us of your humanity for, quote, spirituality. The most spiritual saints, Saint Teresa of Avila and others, were also, as it has been often said, with their feet firmly planted on the ground.
Right.
So,
And like that's I was gonna say, like, the smells and the bells of the liturgy, right? Where it's like the more smells and bells, the more human in some
you get
way.
primal and
You know?
tribal.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You like thirst for like all of that, because then that does have that distinction of this is not like normal.
Yeah, this
Like,
is
normal
not
life
like
does
normal
not have
life.
all
The
of this.
liturgy is not supposed to look like anything else because we're completely different.
Yeah. And at the same time, like, still human.
Exactly.
Do you want to do a Cedia?
I mean, if you want.
Page 45 is actually the quote I wanted to end with, or one of the 6,000 quotes I wanted to end with. But let's so page 45. It says,
And we could also do another episode on Achadia, but if we give a little taste, a little bite of it right now.
taste. So the contrary of acedia, you say Achadia?
Yeah, I'm pronouncing it wrong. Who knows?
Who knows? Somebody write in.
Yeah, exactly.
Voice note in. Okay. The contrary of acedia is not the spirit of work in the sense of the work of every day of anyone's living. It is man's happy and cheerful affirmation of his own being, his acquiescence in the world and in God, which is to say love. Love that certainly brings a particular freshness and readiness to work along with it, but that no one with the least experience could conceivably confuse with the tense activity of the fanatical worker. Who would guess, unless he was told so, that Aquinas regarded acedia as a sin against the third commandment? He was in fact so far from considering idleness the opposite of the ethos of work that he simply interprets it as an offense against the commandment in which we are called to have the peace of the mind in God.
Okay, Laura, we did not talk about this, but I think we need to do a part 2 and talk about
acedia.
Yeah.
As the antithesis of leisure.
Yeah.
Okay, so then the actual quote that I want to like end. Are we kind of towards the end? Can I mention Mary, please?
Yes, let's mention Mary before we close, and we'll promise a part 2 on this.
So I, in reading this and thinking about what it means to be, like what's like the feminine manifestation of what leisure looks like what does this look like in our world? And I was thinking a lot about the quietness of Our Lady.
Yep.
And what was Mary's life like, in the year 15?
There was a lot of pondering. She pondered a lot.
But also a lot of like hard work, like the washing. I just think about, again, before like washing machine, so practical. But I mean, like her life was like a lot of physical work, but also a complete attitude towards like, I know what this is all for. Like she knew she was about God, like fiat, like she just knew. So in terms of making like leisure practical and real, I think like taking Our Lady with us throughout our days and thinking like, oh, what was her attitude like? Like, I don't think she was like, I got to work really hard to earn. She's like, wait, but by the time she was 14, she had already like earned. No, she was gifted.
Yeah.
Jesus and Joseph, like it's a whole, like her whole orientation of her being.
Yeah, she maintained a completely leisurely attitude.
Right.
Even though the day-to-day, except for the Sabbath, was mainly work, because she had Jesus right there. Always.
Jesus right there. Like
always
in her household.
Always in the, like her actual literal physical gaze was always on Jesus. And also the time after his ascension, however long it was from ascension to assumption, who knows? I don't know. I'm sure somebody other knows. Call in. But her singularity. So it's a help, I think, to us that yes, there is the silence, the hiddenness, the solitude, the pondering, which is so much a part of the feminine genius, but also that she kept her gaze on our Lord through everything.
Yeah. And again, when it's like, oh, leisure, basis of culture, change culture, and like women are the answer, it can feel kind of big. Like, whoa, I don't know how to like do all those things. Or like how to like stop being focused on production, or how to stop being all about hard work, or how to stop changing all those attitudes.
Yeah,
But
it's
I
not
think,
like, oh, now you don't do, I mean, the way that in a very down to earth, I think I've mentioned this before on a podcast. I don't know. This is all very embarrassing, which is why I never listen to these episodes after we record them. But like, if I've got or like things in my home that I need to organize and clean, I mean, I feel personally offended, which is unreasonable and probably a sign of some vice. But if I shift my thinking and say, I'm going to organize this room for Jesus. Like
right.
it's, Jesus left the room messy again, or whatever it is. Suddenly it's joyful and celebratory and like ordered. And like you were saying earlier in the podcast, which is so helpful. I know why I'm doing everything that I'm doing. I know the meaning. And then that makes even the most mundane tasks, dishwashing or laundry or whatever it is that I feel personally offended by, it gives it not just meaning, but salvific efficacy. This is
And like a
yeah.
direct like way to tap into personal relationship with Christ with the tangibility of the everyday. Like it's crazy, and like
It would really boost our reputation in the secular world if we could, yes, more on that.
more on
More on that.
okay, I love this last little bit. Leisure is only possible. Okay, so we started out talking with like, how do you enjoy leisure? All of that. So I have the answer. All right. Leisure is only possible when a man is at one with himself, when he acquiesces in his own being. Leisure, so then this is from earlier in the episode. Leisure, it must be clearly understood as a mental and spiritual attitude. It is not simply the result of external factors. It is in the first place an attitude of the mind, a condition of the soul. And we'll end there because people keep saying like positives and then like
we'll end there. Hopefully we can talk again. But just one last note, as you were reading that, I was thinking, we're so unleisurely, and because we're unleisurely, we are not a creative culture, right? Even like the movies we like are just redos of whatever. But the entertainment that we enter into, even not leisure, but just entertainment and amusement, with a cultivated leisurely attitude, we can enter into that with more enjoyment. Because what I see is a lot of people doing a lot of entertaining, amusing things and still not enjoying it. Why? Because you need God. You need spirituality. Okay, great. One there. Thank you, Laura, so much. Until next time.
bye.